My name's Cari Daub. I did not grow up as a child in the church. My grandparents were pastors in the church for 68 years, but my mother, when she married, left the church, wasn't very religious, married my father who was an alcoholic, and my childhood was pretty chaotic. When I met my husband, we got married, and we actually tried for children for about 5 years, and we were unsuccessful. We had gone to Dr. Body, the K+8 doctor in Hershey. He gave us our options, and we had a lot of friends who were going through in vitro miscarriages, things like that, and we thought maybe we didn't want to go down that path, so we kind of stopped the whole process. And then 5 years into our marriage, we found out we were pregnant, and that was our first daughter. And things were going along quite well. I actually have a kidney disease that I was diagnosed with when I was 19, and we were concerned about that, but it was going along pretty well up until week 16. They found that she wasn't growing quite well enough in utero, and they thought that maybe that was part of my kidney disease. So I was on a high-risk pregnancy. I saw the doctor twice a week in Harrisburg. I went to Harrisburg Hospital for my pregnancies. At about 20 weeks, they decided that I needed to be hospitalized. So I stayed in the hospital at that point for 7 weeks on hospital bed rest because they thought that hospital bed rest would help her to grow more quickly. The day that I went to the hospital, Harrisburg Hospital, when they told me I had to be admitted, I had gone to an appointment from work. I went on my lunch hour, and they said, "You're not going home today. You have to go into the hospital." And I was devastated. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready for this, but I had to do it. So I went to the Harrisburg Hospital, and the room I had happened to be right along the river, and there was a window facing the river and a window facing the highway, and that day there was a rainbow. And if you know anything about rainbows, you know that the rainbow is God's promise. And so I took that and I thought, you know, this is God's promise that everything's gonna be okay, because I was a nervous first-time mom that now had to be on hospital bed rest because they told me my baby wasn't doing well. It came to the point that she wasn't growing well, and so 6 weeks early, they brought her out. And she was 5 pounds, 9 ounces. That was my first pregnancy. We had just started going back to church a little bit. We had a family friend who passed away, and that kind of catapulted us into going back to church. And I had gotten connected with the church, and on Wednesday nights at their prayer meeting, they would call me at the hospital, and they would pray for me over the phone, all through my pregnancy, the whole time I was in the hospital. And she came out, she was beautiful, she was perfect. They told me to expect this little tiny baby that would have to go right to NICU, and she came out screaming. She was fine. So that was my first daughter, and I thought I had used up all my miracles for that first baby. So when we tried for our second baby, we thought it might take a few years like it did the first time, and it didn't though. We got pregnant right away. The reason I found out I was pregnant is I started having heart palpitations, and at the doctor's office, they did a small in-office EKG, and they said, this looks okay, but I would prefer that you go to the ER and have your heart looked at for a longer period of time. So I went to the ER, and at the ER they said, "Are you pregnant?" And I said, "No, I don't think I am," but they gave me a pregnancy test, and they found out I was pregnant. But they put me on the EKG, and they said, "It looks a little abnormal, but it might be your normal, but we're gonna keep an eye on this." I didn't think anything of it, but I was excited. I was pregnant for the second time, so we were excited. We came to 16 weeks, and that's when they first started to see that my first daughter hadn't been growing. So I was excited to see this scan, to see how she was doing, and to see if it had gotten better this time. And so they took me in for my 16-week scan. They're like, "Oh yeah, she's looking good. She's growing well. Everything looks fine." And I was like, great. I was excited. I was there by myself just during a work day, went down to the doctor's office. They took me into a conference room. And silly me, I thought a conference room, maybe all the exam rooms were full. I had no idea. So they took me into the conference room and they said, "Mrs. Daub, your baby's fine, but we're concerned about your heart. We think you have pulmonary hypertension, and we don't think that you or your baby, or either both of you, would survive the pregnancy. So we'd like you to terminate the pregnancy." And I couldn't imagine, after seeing this baby moving, and we did the measurements, of giving up the baby, of terminating the pregnancy. I just couldn't wrap my head around that idea. And so that happened to be a Wednesday that night, and they had prayer meeting at church. And so we decided to go and share the news with the church and explain to them what was happening and what the doctors wanted me to do. And of course, to terminate a pregnancy, they want you to terminate before 20 weeks. So it was kind of a pressure to you got to make a decision about this. You can't wait. We went to church, we were prayed for, I was anointed, and they prayed for a decision. And my only option at that time was to go to a cardiac doctor and have them give me a second opinion, which of course I did because I couldn't imagine trying to terminate this pregnancy. I went to Dr. Rice. He said, the only thing I can do for you is we can go and have a heart cath done and we can see exactly what the pressures are that we're working with. They put a sheet over my face and they went into my jugular, and I'm awake while they're doing it. And all the nurses in the room were asking me, like, why are you having this done while you're pregnant? And I was explaining to them what was happening. Of course, I was saying that there's lots of people praying for us. And Dr. Rice came to me before the surgery and he stood at the end of the bed. He said, "No, Mrs. Daub, I don't want you to get your hopes up, because the numbers that we're seeing on the echoes aren't going to be much different from what we're going to get out of the heart cath, but we just need to know what we're working with. So don't get your hopes up that there's going to be a big change." And I said, "That's fine, I won't." So they did the heart cath and they're in there, you can feel it. It's a weird little tickle in your heart when they go into your heart. And the doctor comes around the screen to me and he says, "Mrs. Daub, good news, you get to keep your baby." And everyone in the room, the nurses were crying and handing me all the stuff. They're like, "You got to keep all this stuff to remind you of this time." That it was a big deal. No one expected for the numbers to be so different when they went into my heart. They thought they were going to be what they were seeing on the echo. It was a huge thing. And I really do think that it was the power of prayer that changed those numbers. The doctors were not expecting that to change. They told me before I went in that the numbers aren't going to change. So I go out into recovery, and in order to stop the bleeding, they're pressing on my jugular, and my hand swells up. And they ran me down for ultrasound and found that I had a clot. That clot led to them running a bunch of blood tests and finding out that I have a blood disorder, a thickening disorder, which was probably the reason that my first daughter did not grow well in utero. So who knows what would have happened with that second pregnancy if I would have miscarried, if my children now will know that that's in their history and maybe this will prevent their pregnancy issues in the future. I'm not sure, but it's just another way to show that, like, weird things happen, things that we don't want to happen, bad things happen, but it's always for a bigger purpose and a better purpose. And I think sometimes that's God's way of working things out. How else would I have had those scans run? How else would I have known that I have a blood disorder that I have to be careful with for other things now too? I tell this story because I know that when God creates a miracle, that you're supposed to proclaim the miracle. You're supposed to share the story. And I really do believe that 13 years ago, the prayers helped to protect my baby. So I believe in God, I believe in the power of prayer, and I believe that I have a 14-year-old at home right now because of that.